What if I told you the moment someone with an avoidant attachment feels the deepest emotional impact isn't when you cry, chase, explain, or beg, but when you stop? Not cold, not cruel, not manipulative, just calm, grounded, silent. That silence doesn't push them away. It forces them to finally face what they've been running from. Let's talk about something most people misunderstand. When someone pulls away, our instinct is to move closer, to explain harder, love louder, prove more. But when you're dealing with someone emotionally avoidant, that strategy doesn't work. It actually reinforces their escape. Avoidants aren't afraid of love. They're afraid of dependence. They're afraid that closeness equals loss of control, identity, or safety. So when emotions rise, they shut down. When conversations deepen, they disappear. When vulnerability shows up, they withdraw. And here's the twist. Nothing disrupts that pattern more powerfully than your emotional silence. Not punishment, not manipulation, but a grounded withdrawal of emotional chasing. Because for the first time, the pressure disappears, and so does the distraction. They no longer get to focus on managing you. They're forced to feel the absence of you. And that's when something profound happens. Your silence doesn't scream abandonment. It whispers, "I respect myself." It says, "I'm not here to beg for connection. I'm not here to chase clarity. I'm not here to convince someone to choose me." And for an avoidant, that's unsettling in the best possible way. Because avoidants are wired to feel safest when they're needed less, but they feel most emotionally impacted when they realize they're valued and not chased. When you stop pursuing, their nervous system finally relaxes enough to feel what they've been suppressing: loss, curiosity, desire, regret, and sometimes love. Here's the real truth. Avoidants don't miss you when you're emotional. They miss you when you're peaceful. They don't reflect when you're explaining. They reflect when you're gone. They don't feel attraction when you're chasing. They feel attraction when they realize they might actually lose you. Not dramatically, not angrily, but gracefully. Your emotional silence doesn't break them. It breaks the illusion that they can stay disconnected without consequence. It forces a question they've avoided their whole lives. What happens if I don't run this time? And sometimes they still run, but now you're no longer running after them, and that is the real power. Because emotional silence isn't about getting someone back. It's about getting yourself back. And ironically, that's often the moment they finally see you clearly. Avoidants don't struggle with love itself. They struggle with what love represents. To them, closeness isn't just intimacy. It feels like expectation, obligation, and the quiet threat of losing themselves. Somewhere along the way, they learned that needing someone came with emotional risk. Maybe it meant disappointment. Maybe it meant being misunderstood. Maybe it meant having to carry someone else's emotions before they were ready to carry their own. So instead of associating connection with comfort, they associate it with pressure. This is why avoidance can feel deeply attracted to someone and still pull away the moment things become emotionally meaningful. It isn't because they don't care. It's because caring activates a fear response. Their nervous system interprets emotional closeness as something that could trap them, overwhelm them, or take away their sense of control. So when relationships start moving toward vulnerability, commitment, or emotional reliance, their instinct isn't to lean in, it's to create distance. What makes this especially confusing for their partner is that avoidants often show affection in subtle ways. They may be consistent, thoughtful, and even warm until the moment emotional needs become visible. That's when the withdrawal happens. Not because love disappeared, but because the fear of emotional dependency got louder than the desire for connection. Avoidants learned safety through self-reliance. They learned that depending on others was unreliable or costly, so they built emotional independence as armor. But independence, when taken too far, becomes isolation. And connection, when it feels like a threat to autonomy, triggers resistance instead of closeness. So when someone tries harder to bond, to talk things through, to emotionally engage, The avoidant often feels cornered, not cherished. What they crave isn't less love. It's love without pressure. They want connection that doesn't feel like surrendering their identity, freedom, or emotional boundaries. They want intimacy without feeling consumed by it, understanding this shifts everything. Their distance isn't rejection, it's self-protection. Their silence isn't lack of feeling, it's emotional overload. And their withdrawal isn't because you're too much. It's because closeness feels like too much too fast for someone who learned that safety lives in staying self-contained. When you chase someone emotional, avoidant, it doesn't bring them closer. It does the opposite. Every text asking for reassurance, every attempt to explain your feelings, every push for clarity or connection activates the very system they rely on to protect themselves. To them, emotional pursuit feels like pressure. Not love, not care, pressure. And pressure makes them retreat. Avoidants regulate discomfort by creating distance. So when emotions rise, their instinct isn't to process them. It's to escape them. Ironically, the more someone pursues, the safer they feel withdrawing because it restores their sense of control. They aren't consciously trying to hurt anyone. They're simply trying to feel emotionally untrapped. But when emotional pursuit stops, when there's no chasing, no emotional pleading, no urgency, something shifts. The external pressure disappears, and for the first time, their nervous system isn't in defense mode. They're no longer focused on managing someone else's emotions or bracing against expectations. And in that space, something unexpected happens. They begin to feel their own. Silence forces internal reflection where pursuit allows distraction. When someone is constantly reaching out, explaining, or asking for connection, the avoidant gets to stay externally focused, responding, deflecting, minimizing. But when that energy vanishes, they're left alone with what they've been avoiding, their attachment, their loss, their curiosity, and sometimes their regret. This isn't about manipulation or punishment. It's about emotional self-containment. When you stop chasing, you're no longer reinforcing their avoidance pattern. You're not rewarding withdrawal with pursuit. Instead, you restore emotional balance. And balance is what creates emotional safety for someone who fears closeness. In that safety, desire has room to surface. Attraction has space to breathe. Missing you becomes possible because they're no longer emotionally overstimulated by your presence or pursuit. They don't feel pushed. They feel the absence. And absence doesn't threaten autonomy. It invites curiosity. Chasing creates resistance. Silence creates contrast. And contrast creates awareness. It's in that quiet that avoidants often realize something they couldn't feel before. Not because love suddenly appeared, but because the emotional noise finally disappeared when someone goes emotionally silent in a grounded, self-respecting way. It doesn't feel like rejection. It feels like strength. There's no drama, no blame, no emotional outburst attached to it. Just a quiet withdrawal of energy that communicates something powerful without ever needing to say it. I know my worth, and I'm not here to beg for connection. That message lands very differently than anger or coldness. It doesn't trigger defensiveness. It triggers awareness. Avoidants are especially sensitive to emotional pressure. When they feel pursued, they instinctively protect their autonomy by pulling away. But when they sense self-respect instead, someone choosing peace over pursuit, it disarms that defense. There's nothing to resist, no argument to win, no emotional storm to escape. And in that calm, something unfamiliar emerges. Curiosity, healthy, emotional silence isn't about trying to teach someone a lesson. It's not about making them miss you or feel guilty. It's about refusing to abandon yourself just to stay connected to someone else. That kind of boundary doesn't feel hostile. It feels grounded. And grounded energy carries authority. It says, I value connection, but not at the cost of my dignity. For avoidance, this is unsettling in a meaningful way. They're used to being chased or misunderstood. They're used to feeling like intimacy equals pressure or emotional burden. But when someone steps back peacefully, it reframes closeness as something safe instead of suffocating. It shows that connection doesn't have to mean emotional chaos or loss of control. It can mean stability, calm, and mutual respect. This kind of silence also shifts the emotional power dynamic. Instead of the avoidant being the one creating distance, Now distance exists without their control over it. And that doesn't feel like abandonment. It feels like consequence. Not punishment, but reality. They begin to sense that this person isn't withdrawing to manipulate. They're withdrawing to protect their emotional well-being. And that's when silence becomes loud. Not with anger, not with blame, but with self-respect, the kind that makes someone pause, reflect, and quietly reassess what they're walking away from. Avoidants don't feel loss in moments of emotional intensity. They feel it in moments of calm. When someone is crying, pleading, explaining, or trying to fix things, the avoidant mind doesn't register absence. It registers pressure. Their nervous system shifts into protection mode, and all they can think about is escaping the emotional weight in front of them. In that state, love, connection, and even attachment get buried under the need for relief. But when emotional energy softens, when the chasing stops, the conversations quiet down, and the emotional turbulence disappears, something unexpected happens. The avoidant finally has space to breathe. And in that space, they begin to notice something missing. Not conflict, not tension. Peace creates contrast. When you're no longer emotionally pursuing, explaining, or trying to be understood, the absence of that energy doesn't feel like rejection. It feels like stillness. And stillness makes room for awareness. That's when they start replaying moments, conversations, laughter, connection they didn't fully feel while it was happening because they were too busy managing emotional overwhelm. Avoidants are wired to associate closeness with pressure, but they associate distance with safety. So when you step back calmly instead of emotionally, they don't feel attacked. They feel safe enough to reflect. And reflection is where missing someone actually begins. Not during arguments, not during emotional intensity, but during quiet moments when your presence is no longer filling the space around them. This is why dramatic exits rarely land with avoidance. Emotional outbursts confirm their belief that closeness equals chaos, but peaceful withdrawal disrupts that narrative. It doesn't feel threatening, it feels unfamiliar. And unfamiliar gets noticed. Suddenly, the relationship isn't something they're escaping, it's something they're wondering about. They don't miss the emotional labor. They miss the emotional ease. They miss how they felt around you when things were simple, calm, and unforced. And that realization only comes when the emotional noise is gone, because longing doesn't grow in pressure. It grows in quiet, and absence only becomes meaningful when it's paired with peace instead of pursuit. The most misunderstood part of emotional silence is that it's not a strategy to get someone back. It's a decision to come back to yourself. When you stop chasing, explaining, overgiving, or emotionally negotiating for connection, you're not abandoning the relationship. You're refusing to abandon your self-respect. That shift changes everything, whether the other person responds or not. So often, people get stuck in cycles where their emotional energy becomes focused outward, trying to be understood, trying to fix things, trying to prove their worth, trying to earn consistency from someone who struggles to offer it. Over time, that pursuit quietly erodes confidence. You start questioning your value, your needs, your emotional standards. Emotional silence interrupts that pattern. It redirects your energy inward, back to your peace, your identity, your stability. This is where real power lives, not in control over someone else's behavior, but in control over your own boundaries. When you stop trying to manage someone else's emotional capacity, you regain agency over your emotional life. You stop waiting. You stop hoping. You stop putting your nervous system on hold for someone who hasn't met you where you are. Ironically, this self-restoration is what often creates the strongest emotional impact. Not because you're trying to provoke longing, but because grounded confidence is magnetic. When someone senses that you're no longer emotionally available for inconsistency, drama, or emotional neglect, it forces clarity, both in you and in them. You're no longer operating from fear of loss, you're operating from self-trust, and whether they step forward or not, you win. If they grow, communicate, and meet you emotionally, you're now engaging from strength instead of desperation. If they don't, you're no longer shrinking yourself to maintain connection. Either way, you're no longer trapped in emotional limbo. Emotional silence isn't about withdrawal. It's about alignment. Alignment with your worth. Alignment with your standards. Alignment with a version of yourself who doesn't chase love but chooses it. And that internal shift is the deepest form of security. one that no relationship outcome can take away. What really breaks? An avoidant, when you go emotionally silent, isn't pain. It's clarity, not abandonment, but awareness, not loss, but contrast. Your silence doesn't punish them. It removes the noise that kept them disconnected from themselves, and in that quiet, they finally hear the truth. That connection isn't pressure. That love isn't loss of freedom. And that emotional safety doesn't come from distance. It comes from presence. But more importantly, your silence doesn't just change them. It changes you. It shifts you from proving your worth to protecting your peace, from chasing connection, to choosing alignment, from waiting to be loved, to standing in self-respect. And whether they rise to meet you or fall away, you walk forward whole, because the strongest form of attraction has never been pursued. It's peace. Thank you so much for your time, your energy, and your openness. Today, if this message resonated, carry it with you, not as a tactic, but as a reminder of your worth. You don't need to chase love. You don't need to convince someone to choose you. You only need to stay aligned with who you are. Until next time, stay grounded, stay powerful, and stay emotionally free.